Good day, grade 12 learners. Welcome to today's Life Sciences lesson. My name is Tita Makwala, and this program is brought to you by the Northern Cape Department of Education in collaboration with Pagama Research and Development. So in today's lesson, we are looking at our examination preparation, and today we are still looking at paper 1, and we are looking at the second part of our paper 1. All right, so just a reminder of your exam question paper structure. Remember, this is the paper out of 150 for your final examination, just as it was during your prelim. 150 marks for 2.5 hours. And remember, this is made up of section A and section B, whereby in section A we have short questions that make up to 50 marks, and in section B we have question 2 and question 3. Question 2 and 3 each have 50 marks, giving us 100 marks, and that will make a total of 150. All right, and our topics for paper 1, we have reproduction in vertebrates, human reproduction, responding to the environment in humans, as well as responding to the environment in plants. And lastly, we have the endocrine and homeostasis, and all of that also make up 150. So here are the marks for each of these topics. Right, and some tips for your exam as you are preparing. Make sure that when you go through your past papers and when you are now writing your final examination, you read the instructions on the question paper. So this can be the instructions on the first page, the first instructions that you come across, as well as the information that is provided before you answer the question. That information that is provided is very important because you're going to get certain tips and guide on things that you would be answering in the questions. So make sure that you go through that information. And lastly, make sure that you know all your terminologies. Terminologies are very important for both section A and section B. Right. So by the end of our lesson today, you should be able to differentiate between internal and external fertilization. You should also be able to describe the methods of reproduction. You should also be able to describe the advantages and disadvantages of these methods of reproduction. And you should also be able to label and give functions of the parts of the amniotic egg. So we are going to look at an amniotic egg together with all the extra embryonic membranes as well as their functions. Right. You should also be able to differentiate between precocial and altricial development. So here we are going to look at what makes a bed or an organism to be precocial and make it to be altricial. Next, moving on to plant response, we are going to be looking at the control of weeds using plant hormones, right? And then we will also look at phototropism as well as geotropism. All right. And lastly, you should be able to describe the role of chemicals and thorns as plant defense mechanisms. Right. All right. Now, for the things that we will be looking at in diversity of reproductive strategies, as I've said, internal and external fertilization, ovipary, ovovivipary, as well as vivipary, together with the amniotic egg, precocial and altricial development, and as well as parental care. All right, so with internal and external fertilization, these two words already they are self-explanatory, right? Internal means inside, external means outside. Now, with external fertilization, we simply mean that fertilization takes place outside of the mother's body, meaning that the sperm cell of the male and the egg cell will fuse outside of the female's reproductive organs. So make sure that you mention that this is outside of the female's reproductive organ or outside of the female's body. If you just say outside what? So make sure that you are specific with that. Now, moving on to internal fertilization, the process during which the sperm cell fuses with the egg cell inside the female's reproductive system. Now here it's inside the female, not just inside, but inside the female. So with this one, you would see that it means that sexual intercourse is required for internal fertilization as opposed to external fertilization, whereby the sperm cells are just released into water, and the egg cells are also released into water. Right, now let's have a look at some disadvantages and advantages of external fertilization. With external fertilization, mainly we have disadvantages whereby we see that many of the sperm cells produced may not be able to reach the eggs. Now, if these sperm cells and the eggs are released into water, it means that the sperm needs to be able to swim towards the egg cell in an external environment whereby there's winds, there's water pressures that could be pulling the egg cells and the sperm cells in different directions. Now, that is an advantage, a disadvantage in terms of external fertilization. However, the advantage may be that these organisms will produce a large number of sperm cells and egg cells during this type of fertilization, which means that at least some of the sperm cells will be able to reach the egg cells. And if many of the sperm cells reach the egg cells, then we would expect to see a large number of offspring being produced at the same time. Right. Okay. And then looking at internal fertilization, again, here we're going to look at the advantages as well as the disadvantages, right? With the advantages is that with internal fertilization, it ensures that the sperm cells comes into contact with the ovum. Now, this is because fertilization is taking place inside the mother's body, right? Therefore, there is no external factors that can disturb the sperm cell from being able to reach the ovum, right? And then the developing embryo is going to be protected because the embryo will be developing inside the mother's body. And then a disadvantage here would be that only a small quantity of sperm cells are produced at a time, meaning that with organisms that usually show internal fertilization, only a few or one or two offspring will be produced at a time. So fewer offspring will be produced at a time, unlike with external fertilization. Okay, now let's have a quick look at this activity here. Activity 1, question 1.1. It says, in some frog species, during mating, the male climbs onto the back of the female and grasps her with his front legs, as we can see over there. During this time, the female will release about 6,000 ova, while the male releases sperm onto them. Okay, this mating behavior is called amplexus. Right, as we can see, they are the eggs of the frog, and then there's the female and the male that has climbed onto the back of the female. Right, and then our first question, 1.1.1, name the type of fertilization that occurs during reproduction in frogs. Now, because we can see here the male and the female have released their gametes into the water or outside, this means that we are looking at external fertilization, right? And then 1.1.2, explain why the fertilized eggs of these frogs do not survive on land. So they will not survive on land because they need water, right? They need to be in water because if they are on land, they are then going to end up drying out. Also, these kind of eggs do not have eggshells. So because they do not have eggshells, it means that they will not be easily protected if they are on land, unlike if they are in water. 1.1.3, explain how amplexus increases the chances of fertilization in frogs. Right, so remember it said here, let's just have a look at that again. It says during this time the female will release 6,000 ova, while the male releases sperm cells onto these ova. Now 6,000 ova is a lot of ova to be released at the same time, meaning that the chances of fertilization are going to be increased because of the number, as well as because they are in close contact, right? The male is in close contact with the female as he climbs over the back of the female and releases the sperm cells over the egg cells. Unlike if the male frog is a bit of a distance away from the female. It means that it's going to take quite a long distance for the sperm cells to swim towards the ova. Now, if they are close to each other, it means that it doesn't take a lot for the sperm cells to be able to reach the egg cells. So the male and female bodies are in close contact so that the sperm is released directly onto the ova, which is what was said in the text we read. And then again, the number of many ova are released since fertilization is external. Okay, let's move on to 1.1.4. From the information above, explain one other strategy that contributes to the reproductive success of the frogs. Right, so remember the fact that the number of ova produced are in large numbers. It means that the chances of fertilization will be increased. Okay, so this increases the chances of some of the eggs or the ova to be fertilized. And then the fact that, again, the fact that the bodies of these two are in close contact allows for the sperm to reach the ova quickly, as the sperm cells are going to be released directly onto the ova. Okay, now let's look at the three methods of reproduction. Remember, here we have ovipary, vivipary, and ovovivipary. Now let's have a look at ovipary. This is a method of reproduction in which eggs are laid and development of these eggs occur outside the mother's body. This is very important as well, outside the mother's body, right? Okay, and then vivipary, a type of reproduction in which the young develops inside the mother's uterus after internal fertilization. So this only takes place inside the mother's uterus. Okay, which means it is inside the mother's body. Okay, ovovivipary, a type of reproduction in which eggs develop within the mother's body and hatch inside the mother's body before being born. Right, so here development takes place inside the egg, right? However, this egg is inside the mother's body, okay, unlike with ovipary. And then remember, the young will hatch inside the mother's body and they will be born alive. So they will be born after hatching. Right. Now remember, with these three, ovo is outside, and then vivipary would be inside the uterus, and then ovovivipary is a combination of the two. Why do I say that? Remember, ovipary, it is inside the egg but outside the mother's body. Vivipary is inside the mother's uterus or inside the mother's body. So a combination of these two would be that there is an egg involved and the fact that it is inside the mother's body. So the ovo part is the egg, and then the vivipary part is inside the mother's body. So that is how you can best remember these two. Right, now let's have a look at the advantages of these methods as well as the disadvantages. With ovipary, the advantages is that the egg and the sperm cells are produced in large numbers, which increases the chances of survival, as we have discussed. This when development is outside the mother's body or fertilization is outside the mother's body, it means that we need a large number of sperm cells and egg cells in order for that to increase or help increase the chances of fertilization and the chances of survival. And then the disadvantages is that they may be eaten by predators. Now, if these are developing outside the mother's body and they are not supervised, the mother is not around, it means that they may be easily eaten by these predators, right? And the mortality rate is also high for ovipary development or reproduction. Okay, now we move on to vivipary. Right, with vivipary, that is where we see internal fertilization taking place, right? It means that chances of fertilization are increased in this case because it will be easy for the sperm cell to reach the ova or the egg cell, right? Development occurs within the mother's body, meaning that there is protection against those predators for the developing young, and the young are born well developed and are therefore less prone to being intact, meaning that because they are well developed, they can move around, they can take care of themselves, therefore it is not easy for them to be attacked. And then with the disadvantages, fewer offspring are born. Because of internal fertilization, a few ova or only one ova will be fertilized at a time, meaning that few offspring will be born or produced, and then there is a need for more energy for the female in order for them to be able to carry that developing young. And then we have ovovivipary. With ovovivipary, as I said, a combination of ovipary and vivipary. Now, how will this be an advantage? Development is taking place inside the mother's body, meaning that the young are protected from predators, meaning that if the young are protected, chances of survival will increase. And then secondly, the young upon well developed, and the chances of survival will then increase because they can take care of themselves. They can be able to avoid these predators once they are born. Less parental care will be required there. And then we have the disadvantages. Fewer offspring are born, just like in vivipary, and more energy is used by the mother in order for the mother to be able to carry the egg. We have looked at this example before. As we can see here, this whale is a whale that undergoes ovoviviparous reproduction. Okay, so now let's have a look at an activity on the method of reproduction. Read the extract below. It says the bluefin tuna, the great white shark, and the bottlenose dolphin are three aquatic species that are found in the Indian Ocean. An adult bluefin tuna releases up to 540 million eggs into the water annually, while the great white shark female produces 2 to 12 offspring through ovovivipary every 2 years. The bottlenose dolphin female, being a mammal, is viviparous and produces one offspring every 2 to 3 years. Okay. And then we have questions here. 1.2.1. It says, name the type of fertilization that takes place in the bottlenose dolphin. Now, as I was saying earlier, make sure that you read the information that you are provided with before you go to the questions. We have read that extract, but we cannot remember everything that we read as we are reading these questions, right? It means that now you go back, you read the extract again while trying to find the answers to the questions that we are given, right? So let's go and read on the bottlenose again, right? It says a bottlenose dolphin female, being a mammal, is viviparous, right? And produces one offspring every 2 to 3 years. Now, what type of fertilization happens in viviparous organisms? In viviparous organisms, we experience internal fertilization. So the answer there would be internal fertilization because of the vivipary part. They didn't tell you it's internal fertilization, but you have to make that decision from the information you are given. 1.2.2. Explain how two of the reproductive strategies of the great white shark increases its reproductive success. So here they want two of them, meaning that you must look for two and you must give both. Don't just give one. So you're going to give these two and explain how they increase reproductive success for 4 marks. It means that it's 2 marks for the first one and 2 marks for the second one. Now let's go back again and see what the great white shark is. Right. Now it says here, the bluefin tuna, the great white shark, and the bottlenose are 3 aquatic species, right? And then it says an adult bluefin tuna releases 540 million eggs. We're not looking at that. While the great white shark female produces 2 to 12 offspring through ovovivipary every 2 years, right? So it produces 2 to 12 offspring through ovovivipary every 2 years. And then what does the question say? Explain the two reproductive strategies that increases the reproductive strategy. Now, if it's ovovivipary, it means that development takes place inside the mother's body and inside the egg. Now, that means that the developing embryo are going to be well taken care of inside the mother's body, protected from predators, therefore increasing the chances of survival. Right. And then again, because it's ovovivipary, it means that fertilization is internal. If fertilization is internal, it means that the chances of fertilization are going to be increased. Now, when we're looking at the type of fertilization, you must associate fertilization with chances of fertilization. Chances of fertilization are going to increase. However, when you are looking at the method of reproduction, ovovivipary, you then look at the chances of survival. What are the chances of this embryo to survive? Chances of survival in this case, because it is inside the mother's body, will increase. So you get a mark for mentioning internal and explaining how it increases the chances of fertilization. And then you talk about ovovivipary, you get a mark for that. And the fact that the eggs are retained inside the body where they are protected, increasing chances of survival, is another mark. So it is 2 marks times 2. All right. And then we have 1.2.3. Explain one reason why the bluefin tuna releases a large number of eggs. Now, we know that when a large number of eggs are released, it means that this is to increase the chances of fertilization, because should some eggs not be fertilized, at least some of the eggs will then survive, and or some of the eggs will then be fertilized. If that takes place, it means the number of offspring are also going to survive or to increase. The number of offspring produced are going to increase, right? So as the eggs may be lost to predators, some will be lost to predators, some to environmental factors like winds, and that is mainly because it is external fertilization. The bluefin tuna experiences external fertilization. Okay, now let's move on to the amniotic egg. Right, with the amniotic egg, we are going to be looking at all these parts that are going to be contributing to the survival of that developing embryo, as you can see here. So we're going to look at the extra embryonic membrane. We are going to be looking at their functions, as I said, the yolk, as well as the functions of the yolk, as well as the shell. Right, so here the 3 layers that we are going to be looking at in their order. It is the amnion, the chorion, as well as the allantois. Make sure that you know exactly what these 3 do, right? And do not confuse them. Starting with the amnion, as you can see, the amnion is the one that is immediately surrounding that developing embryo. So this is the inner layer. Within the amnion, that is where you find the amniotic fluid, the amniotic cavity that contains the amniotic fluid. So the amniotic fluid is the fluid that you find the embryo inside. So that is how best you can remember that. Amnion on the inside, right? And then here we have the allantois, which somehow looks a bit like the yolk, right? The allantois, and on the outside, the outermost layer before the shell, that would then be the chorion. Right, now, what does the amnion do? As I just mentioned, there is the amniotic cavity and the amniotic fluid, which means that the function is to cushion the developing embryo against mechanical shock. Right, and then the chorion, which is on the outer layer, this is responsible for gaseous exchange. It allows carbon dioxide to leave and oxygen to enter. Allantois also are responsible for gaseous exchange and also responsible for storing waste. The embryo produces waste as it develops. Because this is an egg and there's an eggshell, there won't be any way in which the waste will be released. The allantois will store that waste until the egg hatches. So the allantois protects the developing young from being harmed by the waste that it produces, because if the waste accumulates, then it would be harmful to it. Moving on to precocial and altricial development. So as we can see with the diagram that we have here, precocial development is when we are looking at birds that are going to be born ready, right? They're going to be born being able to provide for themselves. They're going to be born being ready to walk and feed themselves and so on, right? So I always say that when you remember, when you remind yourself of precocial development, you will remember of precocial and you will associate it with being prepared. So precocial development means that the young is born prepared. As you can see, it is born with its eyes open. The body is covered with soft feathers, which we refer to as down, right? They are able to move as soon as they hatch. So they are born very well developed, right? And then they are also able to feed themselves and they are independent of their parents. However, on the other side, with altricial development, they are not prepared at all. It is the opposite of precocial. With these ones, the eyes are closed. They do not have any down feathers. They cannot move. They cannot stand immediately after birth. It means that they cannot feed themselves as well, and therefore they are dependent on their parents. So the eyes are closed, no down feathers, and then they are not able to move, and also they are not able to feed themselves as they hatch, meaning that they depend on their parents. And then with parental care, here when we are looking at parental care, we're going to be looking at one of these things, different things in or different ways in which parents can care for their young, right? They can either care for them by building nests and burrows, meaning that a shelter for their developing young to make sure that they develop in a safe environment from predators. In provision for food, they can provide for food for their unborn young or the young that have uh, hatched already, right? So they can provide food in that manner, right? And then they can take care of the eggs. As the eggs are developing, they take care of these eggs. As you saw in the diagram on the previous slides, we saw that the snake was just surrounding the developing eggs from predators. They were covered, meaning that predators will not attempt to feed on those. So they take care of the eggs as well, and then they can provide food for the hatched young as well. As you can see on this diagram here, the bird is then trying to feed the young, and we can see here they have created a nest which is going to be a safe home for the young. Right, and then our last revision activity for this part. The diagram below shows a bird's nest in a high tree with some newly hatched bird, as you can see over there, right? State two observable reasons why this type of development can be regarded as altricial. As we can see, the young have their eyes closed and they do not have any feathers. They cannot feed themselves as well, right? And then explain one advantage of the nest being high in the tree for the altricial development in the ecosystem. The fact that they are high in the tree, it means that it will not be easily accessible for predators. Therefore, they will not be able to feed on those young, right? So the young cannot move. Therefore, this increases their chances of survival. Now, when you mention that they are not easily accessible to predators, then you should also mention how is that a good thing, because it increases the chances of survival. 214, explain the volume of the yolk in an amniotic egg of the bird that is precocial as compared to the same size of the bird that is altricial. Now, with precocial, they are well developed. It means that they received enough food during development, which means that the yolk was more than the yolk in the beds that are altricial, right? So the yolk volume in the precocial beds is more than the one in altricial because it needs more nutrients to be more developed. Remember, they are born fully developed, so they need more yolk. Okay, moving on to responding to the environment in plants. Here we are going to look at the auxins, gibberellins, abscisic acid as our hormones, and then we are also going to look at the control of weeds using plant hormones, and lastly, the role of auxins in geotropism and phototropism. Now let's just quickly have a look at tropism. Now, this is geotropism and phototropism. Tropism as a whole, this is bending movements in plants that are brought about by a response to a certain external stimuli. So this stimuli has to be external, and this is what? Bending movements. Remember, make sure you know your terminologies. You could be asked to differentiate between geotropism and phototropism, meaning that you have to describe or define both, right? So make sure that you know those terminologies. Now let's look at what phototropism is and what geotropism is. Phototropism is when the plant grows towards the stimulus of light. So it grows towards the stimulus of light. Photo means light, so that is what it means. Geotropism, a bending movement in response to the stimulus of gravity. So this is when the plant responds to gravity. We are going to look at that in the stem and in the roots. Okay, now here, as we can see, we have a shoot. Remember, when we talk about the shoot, we're talking about the stem, right? So shoot A, this is a shoot that is receiving sunlight directly overhead. When it's receiving sunlight directly overhead, it means that now the sun is going to be shining throughout the plant, so it is receiving the same amount of light throughout. Now this is what? Phototropism, because we are looking at light. The plant is responding to light. Now, what is the role of auxins in this? So as you can see, the auxins are produced at the tip of the shoot or the stem, right? You should always keep in mind auxins are produced at the tip. Now what happens then? The auxins move downwards evenly. When the auxins move downwards evenly, it means that there is going to be equal growth on all sides of the stem, and therefore the stem will grow straight upwards towards that light. So the stem will grow straight upwards towards the light. Now this is what happens in phototropism when the light is shining in all directions. The auxins, as you can see here, they have been equally distributed and they're going to move downwards evenly. This is how you would describe or explain phototropism when light is shining from all directions. You start by mentioning that they are produced at the tip, then you mention that they move downwards evenly, then the distribution leading to the stem growing on all sides, leading to the stem to grow upwards straight. Now, phototropism can be two ways. It can be with the light from all directions or with the light from one direction. As you can see now, the light is coming from the right hand side. This is when the stem is exposed to unilateral light from one direction. Now here, there is going to be a different reaction. So the auxins on the stem are then going to be they're going to move to the darker side of the stem. So the darker side here, as you can see, would be this side where there's no light. The auxins move to the darker side of the stem. Therefore, when they move to the darker side of the stem, it means that because high concentration of auxins in the stem promotes growth, it means that there's going to be more growth on the darker side. So they move to the shaded side because light destroys auxins, or the auxins move away from the light. So the auxins will move away from the light and move to the dark side. More growth occurs on the dark side because high concentration of auxins stimulate growth on the dark side. So wherever there is a high concentration of auxins in the stem, there should be more growth on that side where there's more auxins. The stem or the shoot then bends towards the light. So this side will grow more and then it will bend towards the light. So that is how we say that this is when the plant responds to an external stimuli, or it grows, the growth movement in reaction to the external stimuli. It grows in the direction of the sun. Okay, this is again geotropism. As we can see here with geotropism, the auxins are produced at the tip of the root, and they are going to move upwards evenly. Just as they were moving downwards evenly, now they are going to move upwards evenly. The even distribution brings about equal growth on all sides of the root. If there's equal growth on all sides of the root, it means that the root will grow straight downwards. Right. However, so if the plant is placed horizontally, it is going to be different from when the plant is placed normally or straight downwards. Now, here we can see that our flower pot or our plant pot has fallen, right? It means that now the plant is going to be placed horizontally. The roots are going to be horizontal, right? Now, what happens is that because now there is gravity, the auxins are going to be pulled down towards gravity, meaning that we are going to experience a high concentration of auxins on the lower side of the root, right? When we experience a high concentration of auxins on the lower side of the root, it means that there's going to be more growth on the upper side of the root. Why is that so? Because we said auxins stimulate growth. It is the opposite in roots as compared to the shoot. In roots, a high concentration of auxins inhibits growth, meaning that we experience more growth on the side that does not have a lot of auxins. Please keep that in mind. In the shoot, high concentration of auxins promotes growth. In the root, high concentration of auxins prevents or inhibits growth. Let's just read here. The auxin concentration will be high on the lower side of the root because it is pulled by gravity. More growth occurs on the upper side of the root because auxins on the lower side inhibit growth. This is because in the roots, auxins inhibit growth. As a result, the root will bend downwards. It grows on the upper side more, and then it bends downwards towards gravity. That is why we say roots are positively geotropic and shoots are positively phototropic. Okay, let's look at activity 4, question 2.2. It says, a young seedling was removed from the soil and placed on its side. Now that should also be telling you something about the root. Horizontal, right? Once placed on its side, the shoot, excluding the tip, was exposed to light from all directions, indicated here, as we can see, to prevent phototropism. Okay, so the shoot was exposed to light, excluding the tip. The tip was not receiving this light, right? Let's read again. The shoot, excluding the tip. Remember, the tip has auxins, right? Excluding the tip, was exposed to light from all directions, indicating by the arrows to prevent phototropism, the reaction. Okay, so there it is. And then let's have a look at the questions. Name the hormone which stimulates seed germination. Now here we are only looking at the hormone that promotes seed germination. This is the gibberellins. The gibberellins promote seed germination. We are talking about seeds, meaning that we can talk about germination here. Okay, 2.2.2. Name the tropic movement that will be observed in the seedling above after it was placed on its side. Right, so what kind of movement are we going to see here? Because we are preventing phototropism, it means we can expect geotropism, right? Because remember the question said to prevent phototropism. Like I said earlier, read that information so that you can be able to pick up some of the answers as you read the information. 2.2.3, give the letters of the areas where A, the seedling had the highest concentration of auxins before being placed on its side. Auxins are produced where? On the tip of the shoot and on the tip of the root. So let us have a look at the diagram. Before it was placed on its side, right? It means that at B and at E, that is where we can expect to see a high concentration of auxins before it was placed on its side. There we go. B, the seedling would have highest concentration of auxins after being placed on its side. Right. Now, remember, there is no phototropism, there is no light shining here. It means that we can still expect part B to have auxins and also part D, because now the seed is on its side, the auxins are being pulled by gravity downwards, meaning that now we expect to see more auxins on the lower side. B, because there is no light there, and then D, because the auxins have moved downwards to the lower side of the stem, of the root. Okay, question C, where cell elongation would be inhibited in the shoot. Because there is no light shining there, where would we expect to not see cell elongation? We would expect to not see cell elongation at part A and C. Why do we say that we will not expect to see cell elongation at those parts? This is because there is no movement of auxins. There's no equal distribution of auxins going there. Therefore, the auxins will have remained at part B. Therefore, no cell elongation would take place there. Okay. Now let's move on to the next question. 224. Name two defense mechanisms used by plants to stop herbivores from eating them. It can be thorns or it can be chemicals, right? So they use both chemicals and thorns to protect themselves from herbivores. All right, let's look at those now. Here we have the plant's defense mechanisms. Plants use thorns. These cactus plants would be rarely eaten by herbivores because it has these thorns that can be harmful to the animals. Therefore, they tend to avoid feeding on these. Therefore, we say that they use these thorns as a method to protect themselves from animals. And then chemicals, they use chemicals as well. They release chemicals which may have an unpleasant taste for animals, which may sometimes even be poisonous to these animals. So for plants that release these chemicals, it is very rare for animals to feed on them, even humans to try and feed on these. They also have a smell. So that smell also is unpleasant, and therefore animals would not even try to feed on it. Right. And then we have weed control using plant hormones, right? So when we talk about this, we have hormone weed killers, which are auxin-based selective herbicides, right? So they use auxins and they are these selective herbicides. So the auxins used in the weed killers are made by chemical synthesis, and we are going to look at what happens with these auxin-based selective herbicides. So the main factor that controls the weed growth in the herbicides is the auxins. Now we know that auxins contribute to growth. However, here it is going to also be used to kill the weeds, and they kill the weeds only. So we can spray those auxins in a big field, but only the weeds are going to be killed. Why? Because it is an auxin-based selective herbicide. It selects what to attack and what to leave behind, right? Now, it needs to be used in the correct dosage, meaning that you follow the instructions on the package. Because if you use it in incorrect dosages, it can even end up harming the crops that you have planted, right? So because it is auxin based and it is selective, it means that there are a certain type of plants that it kills, which is the weeds, right? And it usually targets what we call the broad-leaved plants. So these broad-leaved plants, or these weeds that are broad-leaved, they are then easily killed by the weed killer or the herbicide. However, it means that if you plant plants that look like the weeds or broad-leaved plants, it would those crops would easily be affected by the herbicides. They would also be harmed by your herbicides. So plants that are similar to weeds can be damaged, but they cannot be killed. However, they may not look very good. I think you would see that in the plants would have some warts on them. They would look like the leaves are shrinking and so on. So that would be due to the fact that they are broad-leaved, they look like the weeds, therefore they can be targeted by this herbicide. Okay, let's have a look at this activity. It says read the extract below and answer the questions that follow. Auxins as herbicides. There are many different herbicides, chemicals used as weed killers. Most herbicides that do not contain hormones damage the plant above the ground only. That is the leaves and the stem, so the roots are not affected. These herbicides are also poisonous to other organisms. Hormone-based herbicides are usually a solution to this problem. They kill the plant as a whole, and they are selective about which plants they target, because we said they are selective, right? They are hormone-based selective. Okay, usually auxins are used as herbicides because of their selective nature in the type of plant they affect. They are most effective against broad-leaved dicotyledonous plants. Okay, 2.3.1, name two places in a plant where the auxins are naturally produced. Remember, auxins are produced in the tip of the root and the tip of the shoot. It is very important to mention that it is on the tip, right? So the tip of the root and the tip of the shoot. State two functions of auxins, which results in the growth of plant. So remember, auxins lead to cell elongation, which can lead to the growth, and also cell division. So it leads to cell division and cell elongation, which can also be seen as mitosis. So that is what auxins do. Name any other two plant hormones. Two plant hormones that we have discussed. It is the gibberellins and abscisic acid. Okay, now let's have a look at 2.3.4. Describe two disadvantages of using the herbicides that are not made of plant hormones. Let's go back and read our extract. Make sure you read that extract until you understand, right? Most herbicides that do not contain hormones, meaning that they are not hormone based, right? They damage the plant parts above the ground only. So it only affects the parts that are above the ground, which is the leaves and the stems only, meaning that the roots are not damaged. The plant can grow again. Instead of killing the whole plant, it only leaves the root, which allows it to grow again. These herbicides are also poisonous to other organisms. We don't need them to be poisonous to other organisms. We need them to target the weeds only. So our first answer would be that they damage the part above the ground, and the second thing would be that they are poisonous to other organisms, right? So those would be our two disadvantages. Okay, now there we have it. Only kills the part of the plant, meaning that it can grow again. They are poisonous and harmful to other organisms. 235. Explain why it would be a disadvantage for a farmer to use auxin herbicides in a field planted with beans that are dicotyledonous. Our last statement said that auxins would kill broad-leaved dicotyledonous plants. So dicotyledonous, such as the beans, are broad-leaved. Therefore, it means that they will also be affected by that herbicide, meaning that your crop yield would be reduced. It means that you will not produce enough yield because they are also damaged or harmed by your herbicide, right? It could kill the beans as well, thus reducing the yield of the crop. So it means that there is going to be a reduced profit as well. Okay, now here we have looked at phototropism. We have also looked at geotropism, whereby we look at the reaction to light as well as the reaction to gravity by the plant. Remember, you need to talk about auxins. If a question does not mention light, it means that you do not consider light. You do not talk about the auxins moving to the dark side and so on. If there is no light, it means that the auxins that are found naturally on the tip will remain at the tip, right? If the question is talking about the root, you focus on the root and you do not talk about the light, because roots are now dealing with geotropism. Focus on geotropism and not phototropism. And remember, shoots are positively phototropic and negatively geotropic, whereas the roots are positively geotropic and negatively phototropic. Now, in our next lesson, we will look again at the final preparation, exam preparation, whereby we will look at the endocrine system, homeostasis, negative feedback mechanisms. Okay, for your homework, you have an extract again, whereby we are talking about the anchovy, which is a fish as well, meaning that here we are talking about reproductive strategies. Okay, we have a graph provided there and we have the questions. So you are going to do this on your own so that you can be able to answer the questions during the next lesson. All right, we have come to the end of our lesson for today. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Goodbye.